And so, as mentioned before, three really important factors as you're looking at programs. And the first thing that's what we're already talking about, safety and risk management. There are programs that have come and gone. There's some, programs that'll show up for a year or two, and if they don't have their safety and risk management policies really well tuned, and not everybody knows them, they tend not to exist for very long. So, but this is the number one thing that we're always thinking about, and the number one thing that we have our students thinking about. As much as the programs can be fun and rewarding and educational, it's always needs to be based on safety. So something that I recommend looking here if you're looking into organizations, look for a track record, look for decades of success doing this. As I mentioned before, if an organization has been doing this for a long time, it means that they do it really well, because it can be very hard to continue as an organization if the organization is making short-sighted choices or doesn't have great risk management policies in place. It should be clear, concise for all leaders, and it should be addressed not only during staff training, but it should be addressed with students the first hour at the airport on day one before every single activity. If it's not protocol for there to be a safety or risk management briefing, to me, that seems like a really gaping hole in the philosophy. So that's something really good questions to ask. But students should be able to articulate what are the safety policies as well. They should be really clear on the expectations for students, the expectations in any activity. So that's super important. And I think the most important thing to mention here for sure about travel is that there's, without a doubt, there's inherent risk in travel. There's inherent risk in driving to the airport. There's inherent risk in every single situation. So it's all about what an organization does to limit human error that could exacerbate some of that. There's like environmental risks, and then there's human risks that can exacerbate those environmental outside risks. Other main things I would say to look at, I feel very strongly that spending a lot of time in urban areas on these types of programs is a recipe for some unintended consequences. That is where crime can tend to happen. It's where students could encounter some unsavory characters. So I think the more that a program is based either in rural areas or also in wilderness areas, you can avoid some of those outside risks that can come up. But yeah, really important that everybody involved, especially the leaders, that they've got the tools to be able to analyze and assess risk in the moment in every single situation. You can picture leaders in the field, and I led trips for 7 years myself. You sort of have like that like superhero vision where you're everything you see, you're calculating the risk and not making any choices that would put anyone in danger. But for sure, that's the most important thing. Any organization you speak to, they should be able to answer every question you have about safety, risk management, and even go over situations that they've encountered in the past that were challenging. How do they deal with that? It's on programs. Students sometimes will get sick. I've had students that have sprained their ankles on programs and things like that. But the important thing is limiting unnecessary risk. There's a term that used to be used in this field a little bit called responsible risk. There's some risks that are responsible. There's smart risk where you're being a little bit risky from the inside, like you're doing something that might feel like you're stepping out of your comfort zone, but it's not something that's physically risky. Hope that was helpful. And as we talked a little bit before, track record is so important. What systems are in place to ensure that programs are safe? Some of the major ones that I always recommend looking into is, what is the size of the group? If you're live on the call right now, what would you guess is going to be a more safe environment, a very large group or a smaller size group? Smaller. Okay, we got two guesses, smaller. I agree 100%. I think smaller size groups are definitely the way to go. So that's a good question to ask. What is the maximum size for a group? We're very intentionally on the smaller side. Global Roots is a maximum of 18. Some organizations will have in the 20s, some in the 30s, some in the 40s. I know there's some that are in the 50s. But find out what the maximum group size is. Some organizations, say that adding another leader can help address that. In my experience leading trips, sometimes the more cooks in the kitchen making a decision, the slower a decision gets made. And I'm not sure that really contributes to a much safer environment. And another huge thing about trips is age. How old are the trip leaders? The most important, most people are looking at the organization itself. Who are the leadership? Who are the directors? The most important people in your life or your son or daughter's life are going to be the leaders, the 2 or 3 leaders that they're with every single day in the program. Who are they? What sort of experience do they have? Have they been in that country before? Do they have CPR and first aid, or do they have a wilderness first responder? Definitely a good question to ask. Wilderness first responder is such an important qualification for leaders to have, but it's a very long training, so not not a lot of people have it. And as I mentioned before, age I think is really important. I don't think when I was in my early 20s, I don't think that I would have made all of the safest risk management decisions. And so I had to wait till I was 24 to begin leading these international trips with Global Roots. And I was the youngest leader that Global Roots had in many years. I know our average age is right around 30. So definitely want leaders that have experience. They've been out there themselves, and their brain is developed past age 25, so they can make those really intelligent decisions. Question: are leaders with students all the time? What if students go off on their own? Again, like starting off speaking a little bit more generally about organizations, and so that's going to vary program to program. Most organizations should have a policy about what does an excused absence look like for Global Roots, for example. We may send students out in a group of 3 to go get something at the convenience store, to go order lunch for everyone, but the parameters should be incredibly specific. Like we'd like you to go here with a minimum group size of this many people. You should be back in 15-20 minutes. Make sure you have your emergency card with you. But generally, especially for high school programs, the group will be together most of the time, with the exception of being in the immersion experience. So being in a homestay, there's another component to that, which I'm going to go into a little bit later. Great question. Along the same line, especially for programs that do homestays, how are they selected? How are they monitored? Who's selecting the homestay families? How are they being monitored throughout the program? How many steps are there in the homestay selection process? Those are really important questions to be looking at. Distance is a huge question that people like to ask. How, are you more interested in a place that's in the Western Hemisphere, like in the Caribbean, in Costa Rica, somewhere in Central America, maybe in South America feels closer, versus the African continent and Asia? Definitely those feel like a little bit further away. The time zone's much different. The cultures are a little bit different. So those are really important things to think about. Communication policy, really important. It should be really clear about when and how you're going to hear from students. I think there's been a transition in this field to some programs are allowing more and more students to bring cell phones on programs. I think it's a double-edged sword. Cell phones attract a lot of unwanted attention. It's like holding up like $1,000 bill all over the place. We've chosen not to allow, we're an electronics-free program, or technology-free program, with the exception of cameras. And we found that it allows students to be much more immersed in the experience. They're less likely to be crossing a road with traffic with their head buried in their phone. But on our side, we make sure parents are very clear about when are the next calls home. So students call home between 2 and 5 times in each program. So parents are going to know when their students are calling home. And also, you should know from the program provider in what instances am I going to hear from the office. So for us, for example, anytime there's a behavioral incident. Luckily, we don't deal with those very often. The students are very dialed into the group experience that we provide. Injury, sickness, how would you get in touch with son or daughter if there was something that they need to know about? Perhaps a family member is sick or passes away, and that information needs to get to son or daughter. It should be really clear. The office should be able to tell you exactly how that would happen. Mentioned urban versus rural. I think veering towards more rural areas is going to be a really important factor in managing risk. And ensuring, as we mentioned before, I think it was a great question from Stuart about buddy system. What does the buddy system look like? What is the expectation for students if they're not all together with a group at one time? Awesome question. I think hearing from other parents is so important. Hearing what they have to say, what their experience was like. share a couple things. You can see what a parent from Costa Rica has said. Another parent, a Nepal parent from 2017 recently said, everything about the Global Roots program is polished and professional. Nothing is left to chance, risk is mitigated, and preparation is a focus. All of that combined results in a wonderful and exciting existence throughout the trip, which our kids will have for them for the rest of their lives. And they had a son that went to Nepal, and 7 or 8 years earlier, another son that joined us in Latin America. One thing I love about that second quote is saying that risk is mitigated. Again, you can't totally eliminate risk. The people are not robots. We cannot control the tides or the tectonic plates, but making sure that that risk is mitigated and minimized in every single situation. Again, talked a little bit about inherent risks. Huge thing, as mentioned before, you want to know that the organization, that they've got processes in place, and especially staff that are on call to support leaders if and when unexpected circumstances come up. So confident and decisive is so important, especially when something is timely. So everyone should be really on the same page there. So take a second to catch our breath. Yeah, I want to see if so far if this makes sense. Are there other questions that you have about safety? I've got a couple questions that came in over email for people that couldn't attend live that I'll answer, but if you're here with us live, feel free to type those in. One question is, do kids get sick from food or water? Any program should be putting in every single precaution to make sure students are drinking clean, purified water, and eating tasty food. But the reality is, unless you're living in a vacuum, students are going to be introduced to bacteria that their bodies are not used to, and the body's response is usually when they first meet this bacteria that they don't know is they want to get it out one way or another. So normal traveler sickness, that is not something that concerns us at all, and we let every student know that you might have traveler's diarrhea on the program, you might throw up in the program, and that's nothing to be concerned about. Our leaders know very clearly when something goes from a very simple, normal traveler's bug to something that should require some sort of intervention or a visit to a medical professional. That was a great question. Dietary restrictions and allergies, awesome question. That's going to depend program to program. We've had countless vegans, vegetarians, students that have severe nut allergies that require an EpiPen. So that's just really an important dialogue with the organization, that they can handle those types of restrictions or allergies, and that they have processes in place to address anything that comes up during the